This is Tony Lupoy from Cantina Creative. Today we're going to dive into Adobe After Effects. We're going to talk about taking your composites and visual effects to the next level. Let's go. Here's a sample shot that we can use for this demo. Let's go over the steps used to create this composite. As you can see, it is a pretty straightforward shot that you could complete quickly for your own project by following some simple steps. However, let's take this opportunity to explore Adobe After Effects in more depth. I plan to use this setup here to highlight the capabilities of After Effects, but to also mock up my workflow. This is how I want to break down the scope of these tasks. We want a pass of this plate that has been degrained. I'm thinking for this shot, I would love to have a pass of this without any tracking markers, as it is pretty simple to track. We don't really need them, but we do now have to paint them all out. And this will help bring back some details. I like these in-camera natural reflections here. Let's make a note to ensure those are retained. Let's take some liberties and drop a reflection up top here. Once we have a degrained clean plate, let's go over a few despill methods. I will show you how this can help bring back details in the comp. Again, maybe overkill for this, but let's just do it. I will want to build out a grain pass for the monitor graphics. We will want to track the shot, build a mat with a combination of keys and roto shapes, composite the graphics into the shot, then QC the shot against the original plate to look for areas we can improve on. We are working in Adobe After Effects version 25.1. OpenColor.io will assist us in managing our ACES color workflow. I'll select the latest ACES profile, a comprehensive profile that includes many of the settings I commonly use. For this tutorial, we will be compositing our shot in a linear environment. Our working color space will be ACES CG. We've selected this default display LUT that will allow me to view my linear ACES CG comp on my sRGB monitor. However, if you're working on a show with a specific show color, we could turn off the default display LUT and we can toggle it to none. Then we could float a custom display LUT over the footage using an adjustment layer. These are two methods that you can use to view your comps under a display LUT. So let's go ahead and import our footage. We know our footage is in ACES CG, so let's update this for a seamless color space environment. Everything for this demo will be in ACES CG. We can make a new comp. I have gotten in the habit of ensuring that the first frame of the comp matches the first frame of the sequence. Okay, so this will be our plate comp. Let's incorporate that into our main composition. Returning to our display LUT, we can either work with an approved specific show LUT that operates as an adjustment layer over the composition, or we can use Adobe After Effects default built-in display LUT for a quick temporary display. We can duplicate our plate for future reference. This is handy to compare any frame in the comp to the main plate really quickly here. Okay, let's tackle the degrain process. Something that we can plan to bake out. My favorite way to degrain is using Neat Video. Reduced noise does a phenomenal job of building out a profile. We can review the results inside of Neat Video or check it out here via the Blue channel. Let's update the comp frame range so that all the comps and the file frame numbers are all synced up. We will need to render the degrain plate and bring it back in, bake it out. I will render it as an OpenEXR file using PIS compression. We need to set up our output to render in the correct color space, which is ACES CG. Generally, I bake out my degrain because the reduced noise function can be computationally heavy. I will use this degrain plate for tracking and painting. I might use it multiple times in the composition. Avoiding the need to process live noise reduction for each frame is something that we can optimize. Now let's bring the render back in and ensure that we change the default import color space from ACES 2065 to ACES CG. Let's swap our degrain pass back into the comp to replace the live degrain process. Not sure if you can see the reduced noise over the video here. I'm just checking to see if it is a one-to-one swap out and double checking the grain structure and looking for any updates required. Okay, next we will need to build out a clean plate. The idea behind why we would do this and not just leave the markers there and cover them up with the main graphics, using a clean plate with painted out markers provides the flexibility to composite the graphics in while allowing the clean plate to blend and mix with this element. This technique enhances the integration of the monitor graphics compared to using fully opaque graphics covering up the markers. If we can successfully implement this here, it will enable us to utilize small details from the original plate. These methods can make a significant difference in the long run. For this demonstration, I would like to explore a few different approaches here. We can consider using Adobe's Content Aware, particularly since the top tracking markers are good candidates. They do not intersect with the foreground hand. Let's start by creating a garbage mat for the top tracking markers. We should consider tracking this mat to the phone, as the tracking data could be useful for multiple tasks. I will create a large tracking area with plenty of clean tracks to follow, here in Mocha. Once we track this, we can parent it to a null object, allowing us to use the tracking data for any future tasks that may arise. Now we can create our splines with minimal keyframes. Now with Content Aware, we are simply going to punch a hole through the alpha using a stencil composite mode. Then we can generate a fill pass and see what magic comes out of this black box here. Regarding the tracking markers at the bottom of the screen, we notice that they intersect with the foreground hand. Content Aware may not yield the best results in this situation. However, there are areas in the bottom half that are free of the hand's interference. We could consider a hybrid approach, using Adobe's Content Aware to remove the markers initially and then implementing a manual roto paint workflow once we address the sections where the hands overlap with the tracking markers. For this, I'm going to create a reference frame in Photoshop. I find that paint tools are more dynamic and the link between the two apps is fairly seamless. I would, however, always recommend reloading your reference frame in After Effects to avoid waiting for the app to cache. Now let's discuss what to do when the hands cross over our tracking markers. We will need to roto the hand over the patches we create. Additionally, we can explore another method that involves painting out sections of the tracking marker on frames that change significantly from one frame to another. This approach will help us avoid paint chatter. In this case, I believe we can successfully implement it. Let me show you a test here where I masked out the tracking markers and created multiple versions using Content Aware. As you can see, it's important to understand different approaches to accomplish a single task. When our fingers cross over the tracking markers, we can create a freeze frame of a clean section of the screen to use as a patch. However, instead of making a freeze frame, I plan to use a section of the live footage as a patch. This way we can preserve the original grain and subtle lighting changes. It's just an idea we can experiment with here. Let's create an outer spline that remains static to hide the movement of the mask. I prefer using Photoshop and their paint tools. Let's paint these couple of frames in Photoshop. An easy way to switch between tasks is by using the content-aware reference workflow. However, we won't be generating any fill layers. We will simply use the reference frame option to quickly paint individual frames instead of relying on After Effects' paint tools. We can refine a few edges and paint out any small overlaps. Sometimes you may need to paint back motion blur or optical fall off that gets compromised. Now let's go to work on all the edges with our paint tools. The process of finalizing work on features can often be quite meticulous. I hope this provides some insight into this process. While you can practice quickly turning around comps that are sufficient, it's also beneficial to take the time to create a fully refined and polished version. After we finish this today, there may still be rounds of revisions as we identify additional refinements and incorporate feedback. What we have here is more of a version 1. Finding the balance between perfection and completion can be subjective, which requires patience, experience, and the ability to try different options as you navigate different projects. And this option we are using here reveals some unwanted tracking marker edges. Let's refine this matte and improve this solution. Once I have this clean plate in good shape, we can kick this out as a clean plate pass. I will use multiple instances of this, and we can optimize how much computational effort is required by baking this clean plate out. So again, let's render this out in ACES CG and import it back in and interpolate it as ACES CG. The live comp will still be available for updates. After bringing it back in, we can do a quick A/B comparison. This baked out plate will be positioned at the top of the comp. If we need to go back and update the clean plate, we can repeat the process to keep things streamlined and tidy. So as a recap, reintroducing this clean plate will aid in bringing back small details and help seat this graphic into the monitor or the phone. But to make this work, we will need to address the green screen. I can show you a few different methods we can explore for your own projects. I am kind of guilty of never using spill suppressor as I get mixed results, but it could work for you. Next, let's use the advanced spill suppression. We are already getting better results here. We can see this method leans into a warmer tone if that is desired, but this is looking much better. As a third option, let's consider desaturating the green that falls within a certain range. We can apply Frischluft curves. We can change the saturation based on the hue. Let's adjust the fall off here. To help the graphics stand out more clearly, curves can also help reduce the screen brightness. However, it's important to be cautious when darkening the screen to avoid losing detail on the edges. as there is a limit to how much you can adjust the brightness without affecting the overall quality. This last method I will discuss is less common and requires some setup. It has been useful for me. Let's go over this together so you can try it out. This will require 2 copies of your footage with an option for a third duplicate that can be used at the end to darken your screen if desired. I'll show you that in a sec. I've found that working in log for this Despill method allows for the best results. Let's first color transform this comp into Airy log. Next, apply key light and sample the color you want to suppress. We can now toggle our view to corrected source. Back in our comp, the layer that contains key light, we change the composite mode to color. Jump out of this pre-comp and apply a color transform to reverse the log footage back into ACES CG. You can compare these 3 methods against each other, and maybe one day this will come in handy for you. Keylight does offer some options available to tweak the matte that you are driving the Despill with. And if you want to darken the screen a little bit, you can duplicate the key light layer that is in the color mode right now, duplicate it, now change the layer mode from color to normal, and mix it back in at a low opacity so the sampled areas are no longer as bright. You can pull it down by using your opacity. So now that we've explored these different methods of Despill, each with their own advantages, how about we pre-compose them all together in a single Despill pre-comp, which will allow us to blend 3 methods all together. We can use all these different methods in combination to come up with some desirable hybrid result. I find that it is always helpful to have your QC plate available to A/B your results while you assess your composition along the way. Let's explore what approach we can take to track this phone. Mocha can handle this level of tracking quite easily, but I want to highlight 2 important aspects. First, it's essential to understand holdout mats in Mocha. Second, I want to show you how to refine your track in After Effects using expressions, which will allow us to fine-tune the tracking even further. First, let me show you why we need to create holdout mats for Mocha. Here's an example of what we should avoid. In this case, the foreground hand is not matted out correctly, resulting in a track that's trying to do a planar object track. However, we have not isolated the planar surface of the phone. Now let's create a holdout mat for the foreground hand. A rough garbage mat will suffice for this scenario. With the garbage mat on top of our layer hierarchy, we can begin to create a plane around the phone itself. I may possibly add a track around the visible markers as well. Again, just make sure the garbage mat is over top of this tracking spline. You should have the layers visibility on also. 2 features that you might find useful here are the quick stabilization feature and the option to toggle overlays on and off. These features are primarily for reviewing your track here in Mocha. With the stabilization applied, you'll have a better chance of noticing any slips that can be refined. This is an excellent tool for reviewing your tracks here in Mocha. So let's insert our graphic into the shot. I have a pre-built graphic pre-comp that I've already animated. Now let's discuss how to merge this with our Mocha track. To do this properly, we should place the graphic into a pre-comp that is scaled to the size of the main composition. This approach is necessary unless we have created a reference frame back in Mocha. Let's proceed with this method. We need to ensure that the graphic fits the overall size of the composition. A convenient shortcut for this operation is Ctrl-Alt-F, which does a fit to fill. To review your track, it's helpful to add a checkerboard overlay to see how the in-camera tracking markers align with the checkerboard throughout the track. So far, nothing is jumping out at me with this track, so let's keep going. It is a good habit to label your comps as you work, even if you have to go back and rename items. While we are here, I know I will want to add a color grade to cool the graphics down. I'll also be adding optical fall off to mimic the depth of field that we see in the shot. We can circle back to doing this, but I wanted to get these empty adjustment layers in there for now. Let's refine the corner pin data. While we can make small adjustments in Mocha using the adjust track feature, which is a solid approach, I want to demonstrate how to parent your track to a secondary corner pin in After Effects. This technique will allow you to make additional refinements without needing to return to Mocha. So to do this, I'm going to apply a CC power pin and parent it to the original corner pin data that Mocha exported. Before we parent anything, we need to reset all the coordinates of the secondary corner pin, and I can keep that effect turned off for now. Now let's match each coordinate, each point, to its corresponding coordinate in the other corner pin. We have aligned these points, and we need to make sure that the effect is still off. So what makes this special here is that we're going to simply add a plus value to the end of each line here. This will instruct the corner pin to follow the parent in addition to any values I add in this secondary pin. This method allows us to create effective compound refinements. We cannot have both corner pins activated at the same time, so let's turn off this first corner pin and then enable our CC corner pin, which should yield identical results here. This method allows us to add Uber keyframes, which is extremely helpful when working with corner pin data exported from Mocha, as it applies a keyframe to every frame in your timeline. I'm exaggerating these new coordinates so you can clearly see the movement, and also note that it does not snap back when we go to the next frame. We have two corner pin coordinates that are working together, giving us much more flexibility within After Effects to refine the Mocha corner pin results. So the next step would be to mat out this foreground hand. This will also allow us to see the track a little better once we get this hand matted out. We've already created a clean plate, so when we go to key this, we will not have to deal with tracking markers in the way or anything like that. Let's have the key work just the hand, but we can go roto the finger and any other details we want to use. I'm going to do this to avoid crunching the key too much, and also just to show how we can combine two matting techniques together. You don't always have to make it all fit with one key. You can use additional mats as well. So once we have a basic key and roto out all the small details, I want to encourage you to use this key layer as your main mat. You can now take your Despill pre-comp and mat that over so that you ensure there is no green spill from your keyed footage. You separate these two operations. Jumping back into our main comp, we can adjust the gamma of our graphics. When working in linear, you can interpret your sRGB graphics to be sRGB or preserve RGB. In this specific case, I'm going to adjust them here in comp with a gamma adjustment and a quick desat. Before we begin integration, let's revisit our depth of field. Looking at our plate, we can observe the fall off and the depth of field that we need to match to. Now let's apply the depth of field within our graphic pre-comp. The background plate serves merely as a guide layer. Any blur plugin that allows you to use a blur map will work perfectly for this. I can increase this value so that you can see the overall blur without any depth matte applied. Now, let's create a solid and add a gradient to it. And this is how we'll build out our depth matte. We'll need to pre-comp this map, and I prefer to place it at the bottom of our layer stack to just be tidy. If I increase the value again, you will see how the ramp is functioning. Let me exaggerate this map even further for clarity. Now let's pull this back to a more reasonable value. So when we're keying, sometimes you are left with needing to rework the edges. For a shot like this, you should not need to rely on a key to work the inner sides of this phone. We can build our own matte for the phone edges, being that is such a basic shape. We can use the matte the key creates only around the hand, and we can matte out the remaining areas with a mask. While we are talking about edges, let's build out an edge matte to darken the sides and seat them back in. We can do this with an inner eroded matte from the graphics pre-comp and matte that against the original matte. Combining these together will give us that outer edge to help drive the color correction. We can darken the edges so that they're not jumping out at us so much. And let's soften this matte to take away any harsh edges. We can always go back to our track and pull the edges out a few pixels to overlap 1 or 2 pixels with the outer frame. We could darken the gray values in our background graphics. Regarding integration, if our blacks and graphics appear too punchy or dense, we can revert to our reliable clean plate. By overlaying this clean plate on top of the shot and mixing it back in, we're not only lifting the blacks, but also recovering any details in the edges that may have been lost during the keying process. This adjustment is subtle, but it can be beneficial if you want to control how much lift over your graphics there are. This is a great way to just mix it all back. Looking at this, I do want to refine these edges still, rework the key a bit, and roto some edges back in. I will get to that shortly, but for now, we can move along. How about we discuss adding some reflection to the shot? I receive this request all the time, whether it's for a matte non-reflective screen surface or a phone that just doesn't pick up any reflections in camera. Many people like to incorporate a reflective element to enhance the feel of the glass. Here's what we can do. We can invert the tracking data for our reflection element so that it has a counter movement, as if the light is refracting at an angle from the phone. It's a bit of an optical trick, but I do encourage you to try it out with one of your shots and see if it works for you. Let's use our existing Mocha track we already did here. We can grab the transform data rather than the corner pin data. We can apply this data to our null. I tend to consider this a planar point track, so I label it for quick reference this way. We're going to use a still of some glass we shot to get some nice bokeh. I want to mask out an area that has some fall off to it. I will parent the anchor point of my reflection to the position of the track. If the position data moves 10 pixels to the left on the x-axis, the element will move 10 pixels to the right on the x-axis. We can position the element as needed and adjust its location to our preference. To better visualize this, I can add a solid layer to see how it interacts with the movement. Now fine-tune it to your liking. Remember, less is often more. You'll be able to see and feel the effect. This is how you can create a reflection when necessary. It's definitely worth trying out. So one last reflection. This is the one that we can take from the plate. Let's grab our clean despilled plate. And we already have a track, so I can grab that as well. Let's set up a mat to help us isolate the reflection of the finger over the phone. We can create a high contrast curve to try to separate the reflection from the plate here. We can drop the reflection under the foreground hand and kill the color. The extreme contrast curve here in a linear workflow will get us into negative values, which we want to steer clear of. So if we apply some levels here, we can clamp the values of these reflections to prevent the black levels from getting away from us. We can soften the reflection to avoid any harsh noise if needed. Then we can add it back in and reduce the intensity of this reflection here. Together, we've explored several methods in After Effects to enhance your compositing workflow. I hope you have found these strategies useful. There are so many great tools in After Effects to share, and I wish you the best of luck in your VFX projects. This is Tony Lupoy, and happy renders.